two parts to what I want to say. In January this year, I was lucky enough to be working here. Ruth's let us use it as a residential, and I'm working with another artist, Sarah Caputo, and we're working on a collaborative project, and the working title is Legacy, because what interests us is what you find, what's left behind. And we were using the beach as a resource and walking along it every day. It was so cold. I mean, it was -2 in the car when we were coming here, and it was 2 degrees if we were lucky when we got here. But nevertheless, we go out and walk and find things every day. And one of the things I found was a lobster pot with all sorts of nets in it, and nets have a story, and so we would scavenge things. But what we were doing then was building plaster, in plaster, towers, maybe about this big, embedding these things in the plaster, in these sort of cubes. No idea really how they would turn out, and if we wanted a hollow space, we'd put sand or soil in, which we could wash away, but you've got fragments of things coming through the plaster. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. It was all experimental, but it was a good chance to get very messy. And so we have quite a few of these towers on the go, as it were. And then about a month later, I went on a course, colograph course at the Cromer place with Catherine Jones, and she was very interesting printmaker to me. I'd seen her work previously, and her colographs were quite different to any colographs I'd seen before. Early on in my teaching career, I'd sort of come across people like Brenda Harthill and Huey O'Donoghue, and there was kind of a lot of macho stuff involved in their plates, where they're really kind of thick, you know. And Catherine actually worked for Brenda Harthill, and she said, you know, in the end she got that repetitive strain because of the wiping, because the grooves were so thick and dense, and so there's that way of working, which is fine, it's lovely, and she does wonderful prints, but there are other ways, and Catherine's was very thin layers, you could hardly see any dimension, and that appealed to me. And also the use of carborundum, which I'd also been intrigued with, which again I'd only ever seen as a kind of meaty, thick stuff, but we were doing it in a very subtle way, if you like. And so we got the imagery, these towers, got the idea of carborundum printing. So then in the studio I started making drawings from the towers, like multi-viewpoint drawings. So thing from this, one from that, bit of this, bit of that, overlap them, move them around, sort of directly in the drawing process, which then led on to how I would tackle the colograph. And it was just like yourself, working on mountboard with carborundum, PVA, dressmaker's tools, sort of things with sharp points, scoring into them, and just being free, really, unlike, you know, not knowing what the end result was going to be, which I think is the thing that unifies all printmaking processes. There's that element of chance and accident, which I like very much. So that's how the print came about, which is in the far corner, called Nets, and it's just drawings with PVA, with carborundum and scoring and removing carb. And because there's no acid involved, as in etching, which I've done quite a lot of, it was easy to do, to move it around, to go to different rooms, to work on it when you felt like it, you know, very, very accessible.
Yeah.
So that's why I had a go at it.
Excellent, and we're glad you did. Thank you.
Oh, and the in the moment bit was
yes,
because of walking along and picking stuff up. I do think you'd actually lose track of the time.
You do.
You know, because you're so busy looking down to see if there's something interesting in the sand.
Or maybe the time ceases to be quite so relevant.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly.
So to that end, all of the curatorial decisions and choices I've made here do stem from that education in primarily 20th century art. And the kind of temporal side to that is I spent a long time studying radical groups. And for them, the time of clocks and watches that I introduced at the start was absolutely something we must destroy in favour of this alternative lived experience, so the time of our own making, essentially. And it's something that continues to interest me on that theoretical level, and hopefully will carry on doing so. I find it hugely, that juxtaposition of these kind of two understandings of the same thing, I just find it hugely generative in terms of ideas and the sort of images I want to make. And then, again, I mentioned this on the private view, but we can't talk about printmaking without talking about its very own specific historical lineage, because a lot of the techniques, woodcut being a great example, these haven't changed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, depending on which history book you look it up in. And we can't, whether we consciously acknowledge that legacy as we're working or not, I don't think is all that relevant, but the point is, by committing to that as a process and to making images in that way, that historical kind of lineage exists. Being a chronograph artist, I work with an etching press, so I've got a couple of etching presses, my babies as I refer to them, down in my studio, and what essentially they are is a piece of equipment that just hasn't changed significantly for hundreds of years. They're exactly the same thing. And whilst I'm not making maybe the same images as would have been made on them all those years ago, I'm following exactly the same process. And that to me is really exciting, to have that sort of engagement, that legacy to a skill that you've learned and that you're applying, to know that it's, you know, how many people have gone before you in order for you to be able to do that in your studio today, and how much of their mistakes have you made yourself, and how much of their mistakes have you actually been able to learn from so that you don't make. And I think that's an interesting, I think of it as a dialogue essentially with the past, and it is something that comes into my head quite a lot, but I appreciate it won't be for everybody. And then I guess the final thing to say is, with the digital revolution, I mean, it would be far easier if all of us did this digitally. But I think, aside from many other things that I think about that, I think primarily a hand-printed image will always stand out precisely because what's contained within it is the experience of it being made. And I don't think that's just true for the person that made it to get that response from it. I think they speak of time having been spent, and they speak of skill, and they speak of a kind of an investment into a process, way more than a digital file ever could. Hopefully everybody agrees.
My adage is cerebral, skillful and sincere.
Brilliant, yeah, absolutely. So that's a bit about what printmaking means to me, I guess. Primarily that kind of link to the past being an art historical mindset. And I'd like to go over to the panel and just ask the same question. So if you can tell us a bit about what printmaking means to you, where specifically you find its home within your wider practice, if you do have a wider practice, if it's only one element that you work with, and why printmaking? What led you to printmaking? What got you to stay with printmaking? I think it'd be interesting just to explore those ideas. Sally?
That's a tricky one. And I'm constantly trying to explore other ways of working and find myself back at the press. So it's one of those things that you think, oh, well, you know, and I often ask myself what it is, and there's various layers to it. There's the reveal, which seems really a simple idea. Oh my goodness, I didn't know what was there. But actually, there's so many layers to that as to why you might do it and why that might excite. And I've come to the conclusion that it's a lack of responsibility on my part. Okay. Which sounds, I don't mean to be funny, but it's true.
Yeah.
I spent about 6 months with ink and paper in this way. And I'm great, I love it. Give me a brush to make a direct mark on a painting, and I will go off and make a cup of coffee, and then go and make another cup of coffee, and then do it and then wipe it off. And I haven't yet understood the reasons why I find that virtually impossible. Give me a mark on a plate that I then ink and then print. It's fine. Yeah, carve underline, for example. And I think it's because we call art a medium. Yeah, we talk about mediums. And in printmaking in particular, there's lots of stages that are in the middle, the medium, that mean I as artist are not directly making the mark in this way that Rory is on his ink on paper. I'm making an indirect mark, and the press takes on responsibility as much as I do, if not more. And so that gives me a freedom because I'm not responsible for the outcome.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Freedom is exciting. But freedom occurs best, for me personally, when there are clear parameters. Paint I find difficult. There's no end to it. It just goes on, and it doesn't stop. Whereas print has to stop. There comes a point where the paper won't let you put any more on it, and it's finished and it's done. So these parameters, and there's been all sorts of theories about this, how giving yourself clear parameters actually give you a huge amount of freedom. And that, for me, is the essence.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's really interesting.